Conrad Tao, and I'm super excited to be coming back to the Soraya on November 16th to perform the original 1924 version of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, among other things. Since it's 2024, we're celebrating 100 years of Rhapsody in Blue. And so it's appearing pretty frequently on my programs this year, but it's been appearing pretty frequently in my programs for a few years now, both in terms of performing it with orchestras, but also in a version that I've been doing with a collaborator, a tap dancer named Caleb Teicher, um, and uh, and I've performed it in its like very familiar orchestration, and I've performed it in this version as well that we're about to present this fall, which is for this idiosyncratic ensemble that the work premiered with 100 years ago. Rhapsody in Blue was commissioned by the band leader Paul Whiteman for his jazz orchestra for one specific concert, which he called an experiment in modern music. And this was a concert where Whiteman had a very specific goal in mind. Whiteman was essentially trying to prove the legitimacy of this very then still nascent avant-garde kind of red hot new form of music called American jazz, basically. And in 1924, the sort of place of American jazz in the pantheon of cultural importance was a little less assured, especially in spaces like the concert hall. Let's call them quote unquote respectable spaces. It's a really interesting legacy. It's a complex legacy. I think today there are very interesting and nuanced conversations to be had about what legitimacy even means. But that is the context, that's the backdrop for this specific work that from its inception was imagined as a marrying of these urban avant-garde idioms like American jazz and also like Tin Pan Alley songwriting and the like, with the sort of expansive poetic forms of, let's say, romantic symphonic music. And so this version, which we're presenting as, this is the original version, this 1924 initial version, this urtext if you want, is ultimately one of many, but it's the very first version that people heard, and it's the version that made the piece a hit. And it's got a really amazingly unique sound quality. The timbres of the orchestration are really unique. Instead of this lush, widescreen, cinematic string sound that we know and love, we have just 8 violins, 4 violin 1, 4 violin 2, and we have a plethora of reed instruments, saxophones, clarinets, oboes. We've got a lot of brass instruments, but we've just got those violins and we've got one double bass, and we have a banjo. And so immediately you get this sort of, this maybe reedier timbre. This, to me, it's like a kind of punkish energy compared to the sort of luxurious widescreen orchestral sound that we are most familiar with. And so the fact that the piece was this enormous hit must have come as a thrill and a surprise. And I can only imagine how cool it must have been for a pretty young Gershwin at the time to experience that kind of response from a piece that was, I used the word ramshackle earlier. I think I read once that that the piano part that Gershwin performed at the premiere was barely written out at the time of its premiere. This is very much an ink was still dry situation. There are reports that somewhere in the conductor's score, there's an indication during one of the lengthy solo passages that make up a lot of Rhapsody in Blues form. During one of these lengthy solo passages in the conductor's score, there's just this indication that says, "Wait for nod." So you just imagine Gershwin at the premiere just playing, it's all in his head. And then he's just, at the right moment, just looks over at Paul Whiteman, nods, and then the music keeps going. It's a really seat of your pants way to make music. When I think about Gershwin's legacy, I don't think of him primarily as a jazz musician himself. I think of him as a brilliant songwriter who created a songbook that many jazz musicians built on later with their own work. But that also spoke very much to the emergent musical theater tradition. When I think about Porgy and Bess, which is maybe his most ambitious piece, um, it occupies this really interesting space between, not just between idioms, but between contexts. Like from that piece's premiere to the current day, no one can decide if it belongs in opera houses or if it belongs in the commercial theater. We often act as though these genre categories are fixed, but they're ultimately historically shaped, and they are not laws. The three preludes by Gershwin, which will have a presence on this program as well, are these brilliantly quick 2 minute little bursts of musical ideas, and they're so effective. They're so the outer movements, the first and third preludes, also actually, come to think of it, have this punkish power to them. But then in the middle, the second prelude is one of his most beautiful melodies. It's this like haunting, cigarette smoke like melody that belongs in a noir somewhere. One of the really exciting things about this show is that I'm working with a bunch of fabulous musicians who I have not worked with before, and who are all very LA based and LA like oriented, and so it's a thrill. It seems like the perfect place to do this, and so I'll be working with Chris Rountree for the first time. The wonderful conductor and leader of the LA-based new music ensemble Wild Up, who are like one of the great contemporary classical, for lack of a better word, contemporary concert music bands out there at the moment in the world. And then I'm also going to be working with one of the great jazz orchestras in the world, the Clayton-Hamilton Jazz Orchestra, and I also haven't worked with John and Jeff before, and so this is going to be a really exciting experience for me. And I don't think I would ever have the chance to work with, say, the Clayton-Hamilton Jazz Orchestra or Wild Up, let alone both of them, without the impetus from the Soraya, without the support from the Soraya, without the sort of muscle that the Soraya has to actually make these things happen.